Welcome to the Cozy Storytime, your peaceful space to unwind and relax. Before we start, make sure to subscribe and like the video for more cozy stories every night. So, where are you watching it from? And what are you doing right now? I hope you enjoyed this story. Now, find a quiet place, settle in, and let your breath slow down. Maybe you're tucked into bed or nestled on the couch with a warm cup of tea. Tonight's tale is soft, steady, and full of wonder. A story from the heart of Middle-earth, where magic sleeps beneath moonlight and memory walks in silence. The world may feel far away now, but here, together, we journey through a land woven from stars, songs, and whispers of old. Let the words guide you gently, like leaves drifting down a slow river. Let your shoulders relax, your eyes grow heavy, and your mind settle like mist upon the hills. Tonight, we follow Gandalf the Grey, the wise wanderer with eyes that have seen too much, and yet still search for more. But this time, there are no armies, no battles, no peril in flame and steel. Instead, he follows a quiet mystery, a tower that only appears under the full moon, standing in a glade untouched by time. It is a place where memory unravels and the world forgets itself. And yet, within its silence lies a message for those who still remember. A story that matters not for its danger, but for its gentleness. For in remembering, there is magic. So let go of the day behind you and step into the moonlit path ahead. The stars are watching, the tower is waiting, and the story begins. The fire crackled softly in the hall of fire, a gentle warmth radiating through the stone floor of Rivendell as night draped its silver veil across the valley. The leaves of the Melian trees shimmered under starlight, and the elven songs, subtle, lingering like perfume on the breeze, floated through the corridors. Gandalf the Grey sat cross-legged near the hearth, pipe in hand, eyes shaded with thought, as blue-grey smoke curled upward like silent questions to the high rafters. Around him, the ancient walls whispered with tales long spoken, and the paintings of old battles and elder kings looked on in timeless serenity. It was the hour after supper, when quiet replaced festivity, and only those who listened to history stayed awake. Elrond came forth with slow steps, robed in twilight blue. His presence always more felt than seen, like the stillness of deep waters. Without a word, he seated himself beside Gandalf, his gaze fixed upon the fire's glow. "There is a tower," Elrond began, his voice soft as night rain, older than memory, older even than the first leaves of Lorien. A place not built, but dreamed into being, hidden in the folds of the world. Gandalf's brows lifted beneath the brim of his hat, though he said nothing yet. Elrond continued, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. "It appears only when Ithil is full, once in each cycle, and then vanishes as though it were never there. Few have seen it. Fewer still have returned with their minds untouched. It is called Elarion, the oldest tower." The name hovered in the air like a breath held too long, tugging something in Gandalf's memory. He tapped the stem of his pipe against his boot, frowning thoughtfully. "And what lies within?" he asked, his voice low and rough. "A message," Elrond replied, "one that was hidden before the fall of Númenor, spoken in the tongue of the stars, not meant for mortal minds. But it is said to hold truths that even the valor forgot. The wizard considered this with the solemn patience of trees, watching the flames flicker and dance as if trying to read their language. "A place where time unwinds and memory frays," he murmured. "And you wish for me to enter it?" Elrond's eyes did not waver. "I do not wish it, Mithrandir, but there are stirrings in the east. Shadows lengthen where they should not. If this message bears warning or hope, it may guide what is to come." Silence fell again, heavy and thoughtful. Outside, the wind rustled through ivy and fern, the only voice brave enough to fill the quiet. Gandalf stood, slowly brushing the ash from his robes, and looked toward the high windows, where the moon's silver light touched the stone. "When is the next full moon?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. "3 nights hence," Elrond said. "The tower will rise near the Forgotten Vale, beyond the glistening cleft where the old paths fall away. Few dare tread there. You will go alone." Later that evening, as the stars multiplied overhead, and Rivendell fell to slumber, Gandalf walked among the gardens, trailing his fingers through dew-kissed leaves and listening to the ancient lullabies the elves sang softly in their dreams. The air was thick with memory here. Memories not just of elves, but of the world itself, of ages turned to myth. And yet even in this place of timeless grace, a certain disquiet tugged at the edges of his thoughts. He had felt it before, at Dol Guldur, in the creeping corners of Mirkwood, in the way the birds had gone silent in the east. The balance of things was tilting. The idea of a message older than the Second Age, locked away in a place out of reach of time, was no longer mere curiosity. It was necessity. The tower, if it truly existed, might hold an answer, or at least a piece of one, but at what cost? In the early hours before dawn, Gandalf packed lightly, tucking beneath his cloak a few vials of elvish oil, a loaf of lembas wrapped in the leaves, and an aged map whose corners were burned from a fire in Bree. He left a single note on the stone table of the guest hall. "Gone westward on errand of memory. Return uncertain. Watch the shadows." By the time the sun's first rays touched the eastern cliffs of Rivendell, the wizard was already past the ford, his staff tapping a steady rhythm on the stone as he moved northward, toward the places that even maps dared not name. The road would be long, the air colder, the stars unfamiliar, yet Gandalf did not look back. The full moon waited, and with it, a tower that did not belong to the waking world. The road north of Rivendell twisted like a forgotten thought, winding through old woods and hills whose names had long been swallowed by time. Gandalf walked steadily, wrapped in a cloak that repelled the damp breath of the world, his staff striking the earth in a rhythm that calmed even the skittish birds watching from the trees. There were no inns upon this path, no laughing hearths or stables with warm hay, only the quiet company of stone and leaf, and the occasional murmur of a stream weaving through moss-covered roots. The further he went, the less the land resembled the ordered beauty of Elrond's valley. Here, the trees grew wilder, ancient things with bark like cracked leather, and canopies so thick they swallowed the stars. The wind no longer carried song, only the sighs of the places that remembered the world before speech. It was not a threatening silence, but it was deep, and it asked something of those who walked in it, to remember or to forget. On the 4th night, Gandalf reached the edge of the glistening cleft. a jagged ravine where the moonlight pooled like liquid silver, and the cliffs seemed to breathe with frost. The air here was thinner, tinged with the sharp scent of old minerals and snow that never quite melted. A stone bridge, worn but still sound, crossed the chasm, and he paused at its edge, hand resting on the cool stone railing. Below, the wind moaned through cracks in the earth, carrying voices that could not be understood but felt all the same. Voices of those who had tried to climb the cliffs, or perhaps fallen from them. He crossed without hurry, each step deliberate, mindful of the stories Elrond had left unspoken. On the other side, the path narrowed, snaking through rocky outcroppings and deepening mist. His breath rose in steady clouds, and the stars above blinked as if unsure they wished to watch. A day later, he entered the Forgotten Vale. It was a hollow basin surrounded by cliffs so steep they cut into the sky like blades, and the sun could barely reach its floor. Mist clung to everything, stones, roots, even the air itself, and it dulled the world's colors to shades of grey and blue. No birds sang here. No creatures moved. It was as if the vale itself were holding its breath, waiting for something. Gandalf walked among broken statues, half swallowed by moss, their faces eroded beyond recognition. He did not speak, for even his voice felt too loud in this place. Instead, he listened to the hush, to the wind as it curled around the dead trees, to the slow heartbeat of the land. Somewhere in the silence, he thought he heard the echo of his own name. Not shouted, but remembered. He camped that night beneath a rock shelf, wrapping himself in his cloak and sleeping with one hand resting on his staff. He dreamt of light falling backward through time. When the sun rose, it brought little warmth, but the sky was clear. Only 2 nights now remained before the full moon. Gandalf spent the day exploring the edges of the vale, seeking any sign of the tower's presence. There was nothing, no shimmer of magic, no hint of ancient stone. It was as though the world refused to admit such a place had ever existed. He rested beside a spring whose water was so still it reflected even the clouds that didn't move. As he drank, he wondered if time here had already begun to stretch, to bend itself strangely around the bones of forgotten things. His thoughts came slower, and sometimes they repeated. But he remained steady, anchoring himself in ritual. Tea at dusk, a song under his breath, the scratching of notes in a small book, whose pages now held only ink stains and lines that unraveled like spiderwebs. The second night came, and with it, a veil of clouds that drifted across the sky like silent watchers. Gandalf sat cross-legged on a rise overlooking the veil, his eyes searching the dark. Moonlight broke through only in flashes, catching on the edges of stone and frost, but revealing nothing more. He did not sleep that night. Instead, he waited, letting his thoughts slow and settle like dust on still shelves. He remembered old faces, Frodo, with that quiet strength behind his eyes, Bilbo always ready with a jest even in the dark, and others now lost to time. Yet as he thought of them, their features felt blurred, as if painted in water. Was it the place already working on him, or simply the weight of years? The tower, he knew, did not announce itself with thunder or flame. It would come like a memory half recalled, sudden and strangely familiar, if it came at all. Dawn returned with a pale light that failed to chase away the chill. Gandalf walked the perimeter once more, his staff brushing frost from stone and fern. He began to mark his path with small signs. A stack of 3 pebbles, a carved line on bark, a circle traced in dust. They were not wards of power, but tokens of memory, meant to guide him if he were to forget. That night, he prepared a small fire and sat beside it, though it offered more comfort than heat. Above him, the clouds thinned and stars emerged, one by one, like shy eyes peering down. The moon was nearly full now, its light stronger with each passing hour. He did not feel anticipation, only a stillness or waiting without name. If the tower appeared, it would be soon. If it did not, he would remain until it did, or until he could no longer remember why he had come. The final day passed slowly, like a page turning in water. Gandalf slept for a few hours beneath a leaning tree, dreaming of towers that bled light and spoke in riddles. He awoke with a strange taste in his mouth, not unpleasant, but unfamiliar, like the air at the edge of a storm. The sun dipped low, painting the cliffs in a sickly gold, and he returned to the rise where he had watched the previous night. He sat again, staff across his lap, and waited for the moon. It rose heavy and bright, casting its silver net across the vale. Shadows retreated, stones gleamed, the wind ceased, and for a long moment, the world held its breath. Then, without sound or warning, the mist in the center of the vale began to stir, not rising, but folding in upon itself, collapsing inward like cloth being gathered. Gandalf stood slowly, heart steady. Where once there was emptiness, something now moved, vague and immense, half-formed and beautiful in its terrible slowness. The moon touched the heart of the vale, and there, in the place where time thinned, the tower began to appear. At first, it was only a shimmer, like the ripple of heat above stone on a summer road, or the way moonlight plays upon still water. Gandalf watched, unmoving, as the air at the heart of the vale bent inward, distorting the world as though the very fabric of it were folding under invisible weight. The mist pulled away slowly, reluctant, as though something ancient had stirred beneath it, stretching limbs long forgotten. Then came the first shape, a line too straight for nature, dark against the moon's white wash, rising slowly, impossibly. It had no sound. The tower did not rise with groan or grind. It simply was, and then more. Stone formed where there was none, aged white walls etched with symbols that moved as if breathing, windows without glass, arches without doors. Gandalf stepped forward unconsciously, eyes fixed. It was beautiful and terrible, a structure that should not exist, yet felt as though it always had. The Tower of Elarion now stood fully revealed, bathed in moonlight so pure it seemed to sing. It rose far taller than it had any right to, defying the curve of the earth and the logic of man. At its base, black roots of stone spread outward, gripping the land as if grown rather than built. No torch nor lantern lit its walls. Yet a soft glow pulsed faintly from within, as if memory itself gave it light. Gandalf felt something stir in his chest. Not fear, but reverence. Here was a thing older than names, from a time when the world was still learning how to be. He stepped forward, each pace deliberate, his staff clicking gently against stone now smooth and newly real. The door stood open, wide as two carts side by side, and within, nothing but darkness. He hesitated, not out of dread but respect. The tower had appeared for him, that much he knew. but it would not wait. Soon, the moon would fall, and with it, the tower would vanish once more. Crossing the threshold felt like stepping through water. The air changed instantly, denser, cooler, laced with something metallic, like starlight or old iron. Inside, the sound of the wind vanished completely. The silence was absolute, pressing, almost sentient. His boots echoed on the smooth stone floor, and even that small sound seemed foreign, like it did not belong. He could see little at first, only outlines, stairs that wound along the wall in a perfect spiral, vanishing into the dark above. The walls bore carvings that shifted when he tried to focus on them. One moment runes, the next flowing vines, then eyes that blinked without lids. Light came not from lamps, but from the tower itself, a faint blue glow that pulsed like a heartbeat. As he took the first step onto the stairs, he felt a tug. Not physical, but something within him, something old and personal. Memories fluttered at the edge of thought, voices of friends calling from far away, though he could not place their names. With each step upward, the temperature dropped, and so too did his sense of time. The rhythm of his walking slowed, not from weariness, but from the tower itself, as though it stretched each second into a minute, each minute into an hour. The stairwell narrowed as he climbed, its curve tighter, the glow more intense. At the fourth landing, he paused, heart beating with a strange rhythm, not faster, but deeper. He looked around and saw, to his surprise, a room not empty, but filled with floating orbs of light, each one casting shadows that moved backward. Within those lights, scenes unfolded, a young Bilbo finding the ring, Frodo climbing Mount Doom, Aragorn placing the crown upon his head. But each scene reversed as he watched, swords unswing, fires unburn, people unage. He blinked, and the lights vanished. A whisper rose in the air, in a language older than Quenya, older than even the stars. He could not understand it, but he felt it in his bones. Climb, if you would remember what the world has forgotten. The stairs grew steeper, each step higher than the last. He found himself breathing more heavily, not from exertion, but from the weight of something unseen. His staff pulsed faintly in his grip, warm where it had been cold. Time stretched impossibly thin. He thought of the moon outside, wondered if it still hung in the sky, or if centuries had passed while he climbed. Another landing appeared, and here the walls were mirrors, but they did not reflect him. Instead, they showed moments of his life he could not remember. A conversation with a young elf maiden near the Sea of Rune, a battle beneath the sky filled with fire, where he wielded a sword he never recalled owning. He stepped away quickly, heart tightening. The tower was not only showing him what was, it was pulling from what might have been, or perhaps what had been lost entirely. And still, it beckoned him higher. He climbed further, the air now thin and sharp. His legs moved almost of their own accord, though his thoughts grew clouded, dreamlike. At times he forgot why he climbed. Names slipped from his mind. He murmured to himself to stay grounded, repeating the shyest seasons in order, counting the members of the fellowship, recalling the taste of Elrond's wine. Each act of remembering cost him something. Something else flickered and disappeared. The tower, he now understood, was not only a place of ancient magic, but a crucible. It tested the weight of memory, demanded sacrifice for revelation. The higher one climbed, the more was unmade. But Gandalf pressed on, for the message he sought lay at the summit, and even if he forgot himself in the ascent, he trusted something deeper would endure. Some fragment of his purpose etched beyond forgetting. The final flight of stairs came without fanfare, only a stillness deeper than silence, as though sound had never existed there. The landing above gleamed with a light not of moon or star, but of memory itself, silver and gold, interwoven like threads of thought. He placed his foot upon the last step, and the door before him opened without touch. What lay beyond, he could not yet see, but he felt it, the heart of the tower, the keeper of the message, the place where all things forgotten might be remembered, or lost forever. The final chamber revealed itself with a breathless stillness that made Gandalf pause before stepping across the threshold. It was vast, far larger than the tower's exterior could have allowed. The ceiling arched high into darkness, disappearing beyond the reach of even his sharp gaze, and the walls shimmered with a strange translucent sheen, like moonlight frozen into crystal. In the center of the room floated a single sphere, no larger than a man's head, glowing softly with a pulse that seemed to mirror the beat of the world. Around it, time did not flow as it should. Particles of dust hung motionless in the air, suspended like forgotten moments. The silence here was not empty. It was dense, full of meaning too large for words. Gandalf stepped forward, each movement deliberate, the soles of his boots making no sound upon the strange glassy floor. He could feel the pressure of memory all around him, layered and ancient, thick like fog clinging to the skin. As he approached the sphere, he became aware of something extraordinary. His own memories whispering at the edges of the room, flickering in and out of perception. They came not in images or sounds, but in sensations. The warmth of the Shire's summer sun on his cloak, the chill of Khazad-dûm's shadow on his beard, the faint tremor of fear when facing the Balrog. But they shifted rapidly, becoming indistinct, warped by the tower's strange rhythm. He reached for a recollection of Frodo's quiet smile, and it vanished, replaced by a memory of a place he had never been, holding a staff he did not recognize, speaking to a woman whose name escaped him before he could grasp it. The chamber was not only a place of memory, but of distortion. Here, time unspooled backward, sideways, and inside out. Here, the self could be unraveled as easily as a thread tugged from an old cloak. Yet the message was near. He felt it, pressing just beneath the veil of what was real. The sphere pulsed once more, and the chamber responded. Light shifted across the walls, revealing patterns, tapestries woven of starlight, and runes so old even the elves would not know them. Gandalf moved closer, and the sphere reacted to his presence. A ring of symbols ignited in the floor around it, glowing softly in hues of blue and silver, then began to turn, and the wizard narrowed his eyes, recognizing the rhythm, not a language, but a cadence, like a song sung without sound. He reached out, hand trembling slightly, and touched the sphere with just the tips of his fingers. The instant contact was made. The world exploded inward. 1,000 voices cried out in languages never spoken. A flood of memory not his own swept through him. Visions of Númenórean kings long crumbled to dust, of stars being named for the first time, of forests rising from ocean floors. He staggered back, staff clattering beside him, and fell to one knee, gasping as if resurfacing from deep water. When he opened his eyes again, The chamber had changed. The walls were gone, replaced by a vast void filled with floating fragments, images, sounds, thoughts, drifting in patterns that made no logical sense, yet felt oddly natural. Gandalf stood once more, slowly, his body older now, heavier with the weight of what he had glimpsed. The sphere remained, but now it hovered at the edge of the void, waiting. The message was here. He understood now. It could not be read like a book, or heard like speech. It had to be remembered, drawn from the very core of being. He stepped into the void and allowed himself to drift. Around him swirled visions. The breaking of the world at the end of the First Age. The rise of the White City gleaming upon its rock. The fall of Isildur, his hand reaching for something just out of reach. But it was not these grand images that held the message. It was the spaces between them, the absences, the things that had been forgotten. He drifted further, letting go of name and title. He was not Gandalf here, not Mithrandir, not even the Maya he had once been. He was thought, memory, the echo of purpose carried through long ages. Then, without warning, the message came. It was not words. It was a knowing, a vision of a thread, woven deep into the world's fabric, now fraying. A power, long dormant, stirred again in the east. Not Sauron, but something older, something that fed on the erasure of memory itself. As long as the peoples of Middle-earth forgot their old songs, their old pacts, their true names, it would grow. The message was a warning and a command. Remember, or be unmade. Gandalf gasped, clutching at his staff, which shimmered into being beside him. The sphere dimmed, its duty fulfilled, and the chamber began to fall away. The vision faded, and with it, the void collapsed into light. He awoke lying on the cold floor of the chamber. The walls had returned, the sphere gone. Outside, moonlight filtered through a high-arched window, revealing that dawn was near. The tower would soon vanish. Gandalf stood slowly, weary beyond words. He could feel the weight of the message settling deep into him, beyond reach of forgetfulness, etched into the marrow of his spirit. But already some of it was slipping away. Names, faces, the shape of the void. The tower had taken its price. He gathered himself, retrieving his staff and cloak, and turned toward the stairwell. Each step downward now felt different, lighter somehow, as if the tool were releasing its grip. Behind him, the chamber darkened, its light extinguished. The message was his alone now. Whether others would believe him, or remember at all, remained to be seen. The Tower of Elarion had given its truth, and soon it would sleep again until the moon found it once more. The stairwell spiraled downward like a memory unwinding itself, and as Gandalf descended, he began to feel the weight of forgetting gently closing around him. It was not harsh nor sudden, but slow and quiet, like dusk seeping into a room. The higher truths he had touched in the tower's heart began to fade, not in meaning, but in clarity. The message endured, as if etched into something deeper than thought. But the images, the sensations, the vastness of that ancient warning blurred at the edges. He clutched his staff tighter, more out of habit than need, grounding himself with its familiar texture. Each step downward was easier than the last, not because of the effort, but because the air grew warmer, more forgiving, as if the tower released him inch by inch. The deeper he went, the more time returned to him, not as it was, but as it had always been, linear, comforting, predictable. And yet, part of him missed the weightless strangeness of the higher chamber, where past and future had embraced like old friends. The walls beside the stairwell no longer shimmered or whispered. Their ancient carvings remained, but they had fallen silent. The living movement he had seen earlier, the breathing vines, the blinking eyes, were still now, as if resting. Light returned in a more earthly manner, soft beams of moonlight, and the faint glow of his staff guiding his way. He paused at one landing, placing a hand against the cool stone, and thought for a moment he heard a voice. His own, perhaps, or someone long lost. But it faded as soon as it came, like a name forgotten before it could be spoken. The tower, it seemed, was not only a place where time bent, but also a place where it healed. It took each what it must, gave what it chose, and then retreated, leaving only what could be borne. Gandalf continued downward, boots tapping rhythmically, echoing faintly in the deep spiral. The night outside was thinning, and with it, the presence of the tower itself. By the time he reached the base once more, the entrance hall had grown dim. The bluish glow that had once radiated from the stones had dulled to a faint shimmer, like embers clinging to life. He turned back for a final look. The great arched door, now seeming heavier than before, stood open still, but the mist beyond was swirling anew. The forest's edge was faintly visible through the veil, though the lines between dream and waking grew thinner the longer he looked. He stepped forward and crossed the threshold. The change was instant. The cold mist embraced him, pulling him back into the world of trees and soil, wind and scent. Behind him, the tower faded without drama, without sound, becoming less real with each breath. He turned in time to see its shape flicker, bend like light through water, and vanish completely. Where it had stood, there was only an empty glade bathed in the final light of the moon, grass bending gently in a wind he could not feel. For a moment, Gandalf stood there, uncertain of himself, not in purpose but in memory. He knew why he had come. He knew what had been given to him. Yet as he tried to summon the words to name it, they slipped like sand between his thoughts. The message lived in him now, beyond voice, beyond writing. It would guide him when the time came, but until then, it could not be shared, not as it was. He closed his eyes and inhaled deeply. The forest smelled of damp bark and old earth. Somewhere nearby, an owl called once and then fell silent. He was back in Middle-earth, but it did not feel entirely the same. Something had changed, not the world, but his place within it, as if he now walked with one foot in memory and the other in what was yet to be. He began walking, staff tapping the soft ground, cloak brushing against wet leaves. His steps carried him toward the west, toward those who still remembered the old days, or tried to. The walk through the forest was long, though not unpleasant. As the sky lightened and the first rays of sun broke through the trees, the mist began to lift, revealing once more the familiar colors of dawn. Greens and browns returned, the chirping of early birds, the rustle of creatures in the underbrush. Gandalf welcomed it all like an old song, one he had forgotten how much he loved. Yet behind the bird song and the wind in the trees, there was a silence he had never noticed before. The silence of things no longer spoken of, names no longer sung, places erased from maps and memory alike. He understood now what the tower had meant to show him. There was danger in forgetting, not just history, but identity. Magic, too, was slowly being forgotten, not through war or malice, but neglect. It faded from the world, not in fire, but in silence. And something darker stirred in the space that forgetting left behind. He reached a small rise near the forest's edge and paused there, staff planted into the soil. From this vantage, he could see far into the rolling hills beyond. Misty fields, the distant ribbon of a stream, the sleepy outline of a village just waking to the day. Somewhere beyond that horizon lay Rivendell, and further still, the White City. He would go to both in time. But first, he would seek out the keepers of old stories, the lore masters, the wanderers, the songs still sung by hearth fires in quiet towns. The message must be rekindled in others, not through fear, but remembrance. He could not stop the shadow by himself, nor even describe its shape, but he could light the fires of old knowledge once more. A great work lay ahead. And though the world had grown quieter in peace, he knew now that the struggle for Middle-earth's soul was never truly done. He turned from the hill and walked down toward the waking land, the memory of the tower fading behind him like a dream half remembered at dawn. The road to Rivendell was long and winding, but Gandalf did not rush. The path passed through rolling valleys and over ancient bridges, and though he saw no travelers along the way, he did not feel alone. The land itself seemed aware of his passing, the trees bowing ever so slightly, the wind shifting as if to listen. He had walked this way many times before, yet this time the journey bore a different tone, solemn, but not sorrowful. He carried no scroll or relic, but something far heavier, the responsibility of memory. With every step, he tried to hold on to the shape of what he had seen in the Tower of Elarion, but it drifted at the edges of thought, like a name on the tip of the tongue. The truth of it could not be spoken, only echoed, and that made his task all the more difficult. Still, the world moved with purpose beneath his feet, and the sun climbed slowly toward its height. By the 5th day, the familiar peaks that cradled Imladris appeared on the horizon, rising like the spires of some ancient crown. The air grew lighter, laced with the scent of pine and river mist. As he entered the sheltered paths that led to Elrond's house, birdsong followed him, and the old elven wards, long faded to most, shimmered faintly in his eyes. He smiled. Rivendell, the last homely house east of the sea, remained a haven for memory, though even it was not untouched by time's erosion. As he passed beneath the stone arch into the valley proper, elves came to greet him with gentle nods and respectful silence. They knew, perhaps not where he had been, but that he had been somewhere beyond the usual bounds. Elrond awaited him by a quiet terrace overlooking the river, robed in silver and green, his expression unreadable but warm. Gandalf approached slowly, staff in hand, and bowed his head in greeting. "You have walked beyond the veil," Elrond said softly. "I can see it in your eyes." Gandalf sat beside the elf lord, without answering at first. The sound of the river was soothing, its rhythm ancient and unchanging. He watched it flow for a moment, then spoke, his voice lower than usual. "The Tower of Elarion is real, not a myth, nor a trick of the moon. It stands only for the full light of a single night, then returns to mist and silence. Elrond's gaze did not falter, but a shadow passed through it, swift and faint. "And within?" he asked. "A warning," Gandalf replied. "Not of armies nor fire, but of forgetting. There is something waking in the east, older than the shadow we once knew. It feeds not on fear, but on the quiet disappearance of remembrance. Where names are lost, it grows stronger. Where stories are no longer told, it listens." He paused, fingers tightening around the staff. "I cannot name it. The tower does not speak plainly, but I saw the shape of its hunger, and I know it is patient." Elrond was silent for a long while, eyes turned toward the mountains. "Long have the wise feared such a thing," he said at last. "Even in Valinor, there were whispers that evil may not always return in flame and fang. Sometimes it comes like fog, soft, slow, and without form. In the forgetting of old truths, a world may sleepwalk into ruin." Gandalf nodded, relieved that he did not need to convince the Lord of Rivendell. "That is why I have come," he said, "not only to share what I cannot fully remember, but to ask for help. The tower showed me that we must rekindle memory across the land. Songs must be sung again, histories retold, names remembered, or else we will face a shadow we do not even know exists until it is too late." Elrond's expression turned grave, and he stood. "Then we must gather those who still hold the threads of old days," he said. "There are few left, but some still remember." That evening, under lantern light and falling leaves, Gandalf spoke to a small circle of elves, scribes, lore masters, and singers who had remained in Imladris long after others had sailed west. He did not recount the vision, for it would not hold in words, but he described the feeling, the urgency, the sense of unraveling that the tower had impressed upon him. The elves listened, not with skepticism, but a deep, ancient attentiveness. Some wept softly as he described the way memories faded in the tower's grip. Others nodded slowly, as if recognizing a truth long suspected. Afterward, they brought forth scrolls, dusty and fragile, inscribed with tales even Elrond had nearly forgotten. Songs were sung that had not touched the air in centuries, songs of lost cities, of stars no longer named. Gandalf listened with a heavy heart, knowing that this was only the beginning. To remember was not enough. They would need to teach others. The world must learn to remember again. Over the next days, Rivendell stirred to life in a way it had not for years. Lamps were lit in libraries long closed, and the halls rang with elvish poetry and the sound of old instruments. But even amid the beauty, Gandalf knew it was a fragile flame. The world outside this valley had changed, grown quieter in the peace after the War of the Ring. The hearts of men turned toward building, not remembering. Dwarves delved deeper, and even the elves who remained grew weary. He would need to go further, to speak to those who had seen the old days. Treebeard, perhaps, or Radagast, if he could be found. There were still voices in Middle-earth that remembered what trees had whispered to stars. And if he could gather them, perhaps together they could awaken the world before the last memories faded. He stood again on the terrace with Elrond, watching the river pass below. "It begins here," he said, "but not even Rivendell can hold the memory alone. We must pass it on, while we still can." When Gandalf left Rivendell, the moon had already begun its slow waning. the silver circle in the night sky shrinking like a breath held too long. The valley behind him lay quiet again, though stirred with new life. Songs whispered between stone columns. Ancient tales passed by lamplight, and eyes turned once more to the stars, as if hoping to read some forgotten truth. Yet Gandalf knew this revival, gentle as it was, would not spread unless carried beyond the sanctuary of the elves. And so he walked, not with urgency, but with quiet determination, through fields wild with the bloom of early autumn, his cloak catching the morning breeze like a sail bound for uncharted shores. The memory still pulsed within him, not as clear images or names, but as a steady awareness, a directionless gravity pulling him forward. He did not yet know where he would go next, but the world would guide him, as it always had, if he listened. His path led southward through the weather hills, across lands once watched by the rangers of the north, now peaceful and nearly empty. The trees here remembered battles long ended, and the voices of kings who had passed into legend. Gandalf paused often to speak to them, not in words, but in presence, in patience. Sometimes the wind in the leaves answered, and sometimes it did not. But always he left those places with a quiet impression, as if the trees themselves had awakened slightly from slumber. One afternoon, while sheltering beneath the eaves of an old ash grove, he saw a group of children passing with their mother, a rare sight in such wild country. They stopped to stare at him, wide-eyed, sensing something they could not name. Gandalf knelt and offered them a tale, one of the old kind, of Bernard, Beren and Luthien, sung soft and slow like a lullaby. When he was finished, the children asked questions, not about monsters or swords, but about the stars and the trees. And he smiled, for that was how it must begin again. In the weeks that followed, Gandalf journeyed deeper into lands where stories had grown faint. He passed through Bree, where innkeepers still remembered his name, but less of his deeds, and through the forgotten barrows of the Downs, where shadows of memory clung like dew to the grass. Everywhere he walked, he left behind a spark, an old tale shared by firelight, a question asked beneath the sky, a child encouraged to listen closely to the wind. But the deeper he went into lands shaped by the hand of men, the more clearly he felt the quiet shadow that the tower had warned him of. Not a darkness one could see or name, but an absence. In towns rebuilt after the war, he saw few books, fewer songs. Lore masters had become farmers. Their scrolls used to seal windows. In one village, when he asked after a tale of Gil-galad, they mistook the name for a type of grain. The forgetting had grown deep roots, hidden and slow, like ivy beneath old stone. At last, as the days shortened and the trees began to redden with the coming of autumn's breath, Gandalf came to the forest of Fangorn. The trees here did not merely remember, they watched. He walked under their branches with reverence, his staff tapping lightly against roots older than most nations. It was here amid the sighing groves that he found Treebeard once more, standing half asleep beside a quiet stream. The old Ent stirred, and as Gandalf approached, blinking slowly. "Mithrandir," he rumbled. "I felt the wind changing. I knew you would come." They spoke for long hours, not always in words, but in the long silence of those who carry ages on their backs. Gandalf shared what he could of the tower, of the vision, of the slow decay that forgetting brought. Treebeard listened, then nodded with a sigh, like branches shifting in winter. "The world grows louder," he said, "but it listens less. Songs are sung quicker now, and names fall like leaves that no one bothers to gather. Treebeard agreed to speak to the forest, to stir what memories still lay buried in bark and root. The Ents would remember, and perhaps the trees, in their own time, would whisper again to the hearts of men. Gandalf thanked him, knowing how rare such a promise was. That night, he rested beneath the stars, wrapped in a cloak woven with moonlight and old songs, and dreamed. Not of the tower, but of a world where memory walked hand in hand with hope. When he awoke, the stars had shifted, and he knew his path was nearly ended. Not because the work was done, but because it no longer needed him alone. Others would carry the remembering forward. He had lit the first torches. Now they must be kept burning by many hands. On the final night of the full moon cycle, Gandalf climbed a quiet hill just west of the Anduin, a place where once he had watched the eagles fly. The moon rose full again, the last time it would show itself whole before retreating into shadow. He stood there, gazing eastward, where beyond the mountains, the Tower of Elarion would be awakening once more. Unseen, unreachable but present. He did not need to return. It had given him what it must. And now, he was part of the remembering. The wind moved through the grass like a whisper tang, and he raised his staff high, its light faint but steady, a star fallen to earth. Somewhere in the darkness, a child listened to a story. Somewhere, an old name was spoken aloud once more, and in that, the tower's gift endured. Not as fear, not as prophecy, but as memory, quiet, patient, and eternal. As the days turned to weeks, and the silver moon thinned to a whisper in the sky, Gandalf's path grew less certain, not because he lacked direction, but because the world itself was beginning to change in answer to his steps. Wherever he had gone, memory had been stirred like wind through the ashes of an old fire, revealing embers still warm. The tower, though no longer visible to any eye, left its mark in ways unseen, in quiet corners of Middle-earth, in the soft hush of libraries reopened and the laughter of children echoing songs older than their grandparents. The echo of Ilarion could be felt. Gandalf walked slower now. Not out of weariness, his strength had not faded, but because the urgency that once guided him had softened into assurance. He had carried the message as far as he could own, and now it lived in others. In the humblest of places, tales once thought lost were being told again, spoken not from books, but from heart to heart, as they were meant to be. He made one final journey west, not to visit cities or seek counsels, but to walk among the hills and rivers of the Shire. The halflings, in their simplicity, had always held memory close, not as grand stories, but as lived truths, of seasons, of families, of small joys passed from one generation to the next. Here, Gandalf found no forgetting, only the natural passing of time. He stayed a while in Hobbiton, watching Samwise plant new trees and tell tales to his children, who listened with bright eyes and mud-streaked faces. One night, as the stars bloomed bright above Bag End, Sam asked him quietly, "Do you think they'll remember, Mr. Gandalf? Us, I mean, what we did?" Gandalf smiled, placing a gentle hand on Sam's shoulder. "They will, Sam. Not always in words, but in the way gardens are tended, in the way brave things are done without asking for songs. That is remembrance too." Sam nodded, satisfied, and they sat in silence, listening to the wind. In the end, Gandalf knew that the Tower of Elarion would rise again, long after he was gone. not just in moonlight, not just in that sacred glade, but in every moment where the past was honored and the future dreamed. The tower had never been meant as a warning alone. It was a seed, a quiet plea from the oldest magics that the world not lose itself to comfort and forgetting. It did not demand war or fire. It asked only to be remembered. And Gandalf, who had walked from the west bearing fire and wisdom, who had battled the shadow and stood at the turning of the age, had at last found the gentlest truth of all, that the smallest flame of memory could be mightier than any sword. As he turned from the Shire and began his journey toward the sea, he did not look back. The stars watched over the hills, and somewhere beyond the world of men and elves, the tower waited, quiet and eternal, dreaming beneath the moon. Thank you for listening to tonight's story. You've traveled far, across misty hills, ancient forests, and quiet rivers, all through the gentle rhythm of words. The tale of the oldest tower, the moonlit vision, and the soft persistence of memory is not one of noise and urgency, but of stillness, of the deep strength that lies in remembering. Just as Gandalf carried his quiet knowing through the lands of Middle-earth, you too carry stories within you. Memories, dreams, soft truths that may not always speak loudly, but are never truly lost. They live on in how you see the world, in how you choose to pause, to listen, and to feel. Let those stories rest with you now, close to your heart, like a candle kept burning through the night. As your eyes grow heavier and the hush of sleep draws near, may you drift gently into your own dreams, not chased but welcomed, like an old friend returning. Let the calm of this moment carry you, like a leaf on the surface of a still lake. The stars overhead are quiet now, their silver light softening into silence. And the Tower of Elarion, though hidden again beyond the veil of time, waits patiently for the next full moon, for the next soul who chooses to remember. You are safe now. The world is quiet. Let go of the day. Rest in the calm. And until we meet again in the next story, sleep well, dream deep, and may peace always find you under the night sky.
you.